IPM a little bit. So this afternoon, or we will have already done this if you're watching this on catch up. We'll be talking about IPM. We'll be talking about principles of IPM, and we'll be talking about and some of the things that we've talked about already on soil and water protection around sprayer filling. So this is a new sprayer for us, but it's actually, this sprayer is 12 years old. So hopefully, as regards its useful life, it's still got a bit left in it. But the filling area, so the biobed itself, this is the concrete filling area, and so basically when you're filling up, that's the wrong way around, it should be the other way around, but when you're filling up, anything that spills on here ends up going on this concrete pad. Anything else from the rest of the yard ends up going into that grass field, because we've got a slight lip here. Unless you get an absolute monsoon, most of the water exits stage right. So spillages contained on here, wash them away. You know, everything is, when it comes to washing the sprayer itself, probably best done out in the field. Most sprayers now have a pressure washer on them to wash them down. And as I said, you know, if you're not using it, it's best kept on the concrete pad or under cover. You'll have noticed there's quite a few IBCs coming up there. We just do a lot of brewing, or some of the. Actually, we've not quite got as far as the brewing. We've got the constituent parts, and we'll talk more this afternoon about mycorrhiza and antagonistics and bacteria and those things that can help that sort of organic fusion. Some of the things that perhaps try and get towards a healthier plant, healthier root system, and that really is a healthier plant, healthier root system, and something that's competing with its surroundings is a really good way of keeping on top of weed control. You know, often, you know, if you've got poor rooting structure, you've got a thin open crop, you might have a little bit of weed in there, but sometimes there's a race to see which one wins. And if your crop, if it's really thick, so hybrid barley, for example, which is, you know, it's a really low seed rate, it's probably half conventional, but it's such a huge tillering, it grows so quickly, it actually outcompetes all the weeds around it. Add to that, if you start adding biostimulants and you're adding micronutrients and a whole host of other things that help with mycorrhiza and bacteria, there are some natural processes there which go to help that crop compete with pests and diseases. Then you get into the world of silicon additives to make silicon's quite good for protecting things. All these things are what the next generation of farm is looking at. What I would say is, like, there's quite a lot of anecdotal stuff around. There needs to be much more science around it, and actually I think some of the science will probably dampen some of the enthusiasm for some of the, you know, let's get there by tomorrow. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, and that's why I think farming schemes of the future are going to have to allow this transition time into a new scheme rather than trying to solve the environmental problems within 2 years or 5 years. I mean, there is a bit of time pressure on this. This is 30 or 40 years to try and get temperature right. It's probably not enough time there to do it. But in the short term for farming, let's get everybody on that journey and then develop the technology. So the conservation agriculture study that we're doing, one of the big reactions to it is this is putting hard and fast figures on there rather than anecdotes. So it's telling you that the yield is down by this, the profitability is up down by this, wild birds are this, the environmental impact of earthworms, it's putting figures on it, and it's been done in Spain, France, in Kent and in Leicestershire, and it's drawing out some quite interesting figures on land type and putting some figures on there. So to continue, come back off that tangent, wind it in, come back to biobeds and spraying operations. So if we come further back here, I've got Ollie to do a bit of mowing here, just so we could see the extent of the biobed. But you can see actually one of the things that we did with our biobed was plant a lot of flowers and wildflowers around it. So if you get stung, it's quite ironic, isn't it? But you know, on a sunny day, you'll see, you know, quite a few bees and stuff around here. So the process is that washings off any spraying or spillages in here end up going down into the silt trap, okay? and then through and into our 2 containers, and then there's that green pipe there goes across a network here into another one, and this is the biobed in here. So it's always a good sign when there's stuff growing on the biobed rather than dying on the biobed, because it means that actually, you know, the chemical residues are you know, the washings out of here anyway are quite low from that point of view, because it's already been cleaned out on the field, in, you know, where it should go to. So in this tank then, and then sprayed out onto, so it goes through the process of filtering through this mix of, and you can see just where Gemma stood, this is part of the lining. There's a plastic liner, there's also another liner underneath it to stop stones from coming through and perforating it. Also, we had a quite, when you're locating this, you're just looking at where your drains come. So one of our main field drains actually comes underneath the concrete. The other main drain comes about 5 metres the other side of there, so we were away from an area where we've got field drains, so there's not an easy route. And I think, I mean, when we've been doing spraying operations here, you feel quite comfortable about where any accidents, any, you know, your best practice of spraying things ends up being in an area where it's got potential to be broken down again on a secondary one. And I said, I think when we were talking about the presentation, I said about if we have a leak, hopefully, in it going through the biobed too quickly, we can divert it into that tank. The other thing what do you think our biggest problem with the biobed is? What do you think our biggest issue will be with it? It's mud. So it's mud getting into the filters and blocking them. I had a word with Ollie today about, you know, maintenance going forward. You've got to keep on top of the filters, otherwise you put a lot of pressure on the pumps. Yeah, so some of the things to bear in mind about, you know, the area, usually the concrete area should be about the same size as your biobed, as a rule of thumb. You know, we've got mixing and filling areas as well, and any spillages in those washing tanks. You can see just around here the Easy Tiger.
It's a mouse.
Oh, right.
It's fine.
Sorry, wildlife, so much wildlife around here that the dog's now interested. But anything in our tank washing where we drain it, that comes back onto the biobed as well. So, you know, the area is contained here. Also, there's just, if we just turn around here, we talked as well about ultraviolet and a system of previously of using ultraviolet and hydrogen peroxide. That was located over there, but these are what they call the heliosecs. So, for example, there's one here, we had a problem with some spray left in a sprayer and it broke down. We had to empty it for the boat to mend it. So we actually pumped it into this evaporation tank, and actually it's already gone down. It's probably another 2 or 3 inches above that level. And basically these heliosecs are very popular on the continent because the weather's so much hotter. They evaporate, they leave the residue in the bottom there, and basically the water evaporates off and runs off, and then runs down here and can run off down there. This version is one that just got put up last year. Actually, we haven't used it yet. It is one that you might have if you were a smaller producer with an ATV with a smaller sprayer, smaller area. This is Mark II heliosec. So basically evaporation tank, and some people will, you know, big farms will probably have 2 or 3 of these, and they wouldn't have a biobed at all. They just, you know, pump any last washings into that area. So, any questions on biobeds, spray washing?
So you wouldn't wash it onto the sprayer on here, really, would you? So it's pretty minimal.
I wouldn't wash it. You know, I might if I got a spillage over here around the tank area, but I think if I was going to wash the sprayer off out in the field, I would do it out in the field. As I say, most sprayers have an extra water tank and they have a pressure washer on them as well, and they, you know, some biobeds are big enough to put the booms out, but to put 24 metres of concrete out just to catch the residue from off the here, it's best done out in the field. And I mean, the times to do it as well are when you're changing from one spray to another. So if there's going to be a period where you're not going to be spraying for a long time, that's the time then perhaps to spray.
So you just basically, this is a case of opening the sump once you've already sprayed out your washings on the crop. That's what goes into the barbed.
Yeah.
You open the sump out, that runs into the.
And most of the time, the systems, because even with the greatest will in the world, sometimes you'll be left with 30, 40, 50 litres of water around the system. It's trying to get clean water through the system, through the pipes and out the other end, so that you're left with the minimum amount in the system. And you know, in a 3,000 litre sprayer, you know, a litre of 3 times dilute concentrate is virtually nothing. But on some things, you have to be quite careful of their impact on the next crop. Sulfonylureas on beans and things like that. You really have to be quite careful that you wash out properly.
You put obviously like all clear through this, and then again, would that just go into the biobed? You washing out from your.
Although all clear is meant to be sort of inert as well, so you can actually spray that on the crop. So sometimes we might actually go and spray the all clear out on the crop, and we've not had any problems with doing that. And that's, you know, that's an ammonia-based substance. And basically all clear is, it's sometimes because of all the wetters and stickers on these sprays, because they're meant to either stick to the plant or stick to the soil, is that they actually end up having stick to the side of the tank. So when they stick to the side of the tank, if the next chemical goes in there, takes them off, and it's on a crop that doesn't like it, that's when you use the all clear to clean your sprayer out like that. But I think going forward, we'll be using a lot more biostimulants, a lot more biopesticides, and we'll be looking at, you know, we've already talked about rotation and reducing the impact. When we were here with Steve the other day, we were talking about reducing the amount of blackgrass sprays we're using. I think we've got to get on top of making sure the ones we're using are effective first, because there's been a few issues this year. But yeah, that's basically around yeah, just a thing about nozzles here. We're still waiting on a couple of sets of nozzles, but you know, we've got different sorts of nozzles, so like flat fan or Amistar nozzles. This one here is actually, one of them is the dribble bar for the fertilizer spreader. Will go on there, but the spray will be, these will basically click round into a different, you can see when they move round to a different, I won't do it now because I'll probably forget to put it back, but the dribble bar will fit on here. And actually on this sprayer, at certain times of the season when it's going to be fungicide and herbicide and nitrogen, those will be at the click of a switch now. So basically you can turn one on here, the dribble bar will be here and the sprayer will be on here. That will be all controlled from the cab, so you don't actually have to go and change the nozzle around or take something off to put the fertilizer on. Ollie took them off after his first day with it, because you see these bits here. This bit here is what stops the boom hitting the floor, and they weren't on it, and the first thing that hit the floor was the dribble bar, which is made of plastic, so hence we need another dribble bar. But you know, so that's around you know, issues around nozzles. And of course, you know, we will talk a bit more, and we have talked about nozzles, but you know, flat fan nozzles tend to have more drift, especially once you start getting down to 100 litres a hectare. Some of the nozzles, like low drift ones, you can either have air pumped into a system, or the nozzle itself creates vortexes and then introduces air into it. And these are all methods by which you can reduce drift. Obviously, if you put more water through a nozzle and it's got a bigger opening, you'll probably get like a watering can effect, but sometimes you don't get the coverage. That's why you increase the water. And you can have things like forward-facing nozzles and backward-facing nozzles. So as that wall of spray is going down the field, if it meets the resistance from wind, it can tend to drift, whereas if you've got gaps between it, actually some of the air passes through and you'll still have the coverage of area, but you'll actually have less drift because there isn't just a wall. And I mean, we won't get into too many details, perhaps briefly, but you know, there's techniques of spraying as well. You know, on a day like today, where I think you know, you might be tempted to go spraying. It's probably getting a little bit breezy, but you know, depending on where you were spraying. So, for example, in the fields that we looked at earlier on, which are surrounded by woods, it's probably really calm in there. So I might decide to do those fields. Or on the top of the hill, for example, I wouldn't be up there now. I bet the wind's twice as high as up there. So what I do is I'd suggest to Ollie, or if it was me doing it, I'd go out late at night or early in the morning and do them, and gradually retreat to my fields that have got more protection around them. And things like the way you go around the field. Sometimes there's a way that the field's laid out, you go around, but sometimes the wind in such a direction that it's actually best to go the other way around, because it's actually blowing it into the middle of the field. Just little things like that are all the things that, you know, and Neil, you'll know with judging the Spray Operator of the Year, those are the sorts of tricks of the trade, and the ability to, you know, change nozzles at a touch of a button. You know, lots of sprayers will be able to change from a coarse droplet to a medium droplet at the touch of a button. So you can go around your headland and put a coarse spray on. You have to be a bit careful about making sure you're still adhering to the label, but in terms of environmental protection, it's much better to go around the outside of the field with a coarse spray and then carry on with the middle of a spray. A, you can get on and spray, and B, you know, the main part of your field in the middle, you're not going to get as much drift. And then you're talking about height above the crop, and some sprayers will have automatic height above them, automatic leveling of booms. So this one probably hasn't got automatic leveling, but there will be a lever in the cab which will help you follow the land as you go around. You'll have automatic boom shut off, so as you come out of an area, when you go around your headland, or you come and get a bit that's already been sprayed, it'll just turn the sprayer off yourself. Believe me, it's far more accurate than anybody else can do, including the dog.
Don't write the dog off.
Right, I think we're going to move inside now and move on to the part about IPM. Probably have a bit of dinner. If you're watching online, hope you've enjoyed that, and we'll